Welcome to the ReachX podcast. Today we are with Professor David Hart. He's a director at consulting outfit E4Tech and he's responsible for the firm's fuel cell and hydrogen practices. Early in the new year, E4Tech published its fuel cell industry review of 2019 and its outlook for the next 12 months. And that's what we'll be discussing in this podcast. So just to welcome you to the podcast, David, give us your key observations and your findings in this report.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. What we've noticed has happened over the last 12 months is that we've seen a lot of activity in Asia. So we've seen tremendous moves in China, in Japan, Korea, and there's really ramping up over there. But we've also seen a lot of changes in, for example, European and to some extent North American tier one suppliers who have made a lot of investments in either technology firms or in scaling up of technology, manufacturing capability. And we're seeing a big political move where there is a realization with the discussions around net zero and with discussions about how we move forward in all areas of decarbonisation that fuel cells are a complementary technology to batteries and that they really need to be treated in that way, and strategies are being developed at a policy level and at a corporate level.
There's plenty to talk about. I think Asia would be a key starting point. A lot of discussions, a lot of public discourse about what is afoot in South Korea and Japan. From where you sit, where do you see the market going out, especially in terms of the Asian players?
So the headlines are all around the Asian OEMs. So it's particularly about Toyota and Hyundai, who have very clearly stated that they will be mass producing fuel cell vehicles, but they will be working more broadly than that. So Toyota's recent announcement about hydrogen cities and understanding how the systems all fit together. So there are aggressive targets for tens of thousands initially and then hundreds of thousands of vehicles by the end of the decade. And what that's doing is it's sitting into the industrial context in those countries. It's about competitiveness, it's about maintaining industry, it's about making sure that the supply chain is in place. And the other interesting thing is that it's pushing other countries to do something. So you see a knock-on effect. For example, in Switzerland, we have 1,000 trucks which will come into Switzerland over the next 2 or 3 years. They will be supplied by Hyundai. And the effect of that has been to galvanize the European truck industry to say, well, perhaps we should be doing something in this. So there are some quite interesting changes that I think will be happening over the next few years in terms of responses to the leadership of the Asians.
And from the investor community's outside-in viewpoint, there are quite a few moves afoot, as you suggest, and the sort of the media discourse tend to obsess over what's afoot in South Korea and Japan, but there are good 5 or 10 tier 1 players in the industry who are proactively working in this sphere. So what have you noticed?
You're absolutely right. The thing that we notice is it's not really below the radar, but it is below the media threshold, as you say. You have very, very large tier ones like Continental and Bosch and Elring-Klinger and Freudenberg. So maybe not household names necessarily, but still multi-billion-dollar businesses who are investing either in buying companies or in scaling up their own activities. So take, for example, Cummins, which is clearly a very big diesel engine supplier. They bought a company called Hydrogenics, North American company, $250 million, and that is now part of their electrification strategy. They will be building out. Bosch has put hundreds of millions into this. There are very strong underpinnings developing in the supply chain, which will of course roll out into the automotive industry, but which are not being talked about in quite the same way.
I think another key facet is if you look at a budding technology or a nascent technology, however the listeners of this broadcast might care to describe fuel cells and hydrogen, you need a tremendous amount of policy support. Now, from your front row seat, you examine the policymaking initiatives afoot in Asia, in Europe, in North America. So where are the policymakers at more generically? And then, of course, were you to compare the various policymaking discourses that you've noticed, who do you think is being the most proactive, or which government?
So it's very interesting. I think the very obviously proactive ones, Korea now has a hydrogen strategy. It has a essentially it's enshrining in legal language how they will build out a hydrogen industry and infrastructure in Korea. So they've been very, very structured about their approach. Japan has always done that. China has come in. So the Chinese government, having put a lot of money into solar and then into battery vehicles, has for the last couple of years been putting a lot of money into fuel cell industry development. Again, partly an industrial strategy, a way of occupying white space. And then in other places, it's a little more open. So the European Commission is now extremely committed, and you see regional and national governments playing their own role. And if you take that down, Germany, again, hydrogen strategy developed and launched at the end of last year. But then it's about cities. So London, for example, zero emission zones, zero emission buses. That has a very strong implication for fuel cells, because anything that's heavy duty, anything that has a long duty cycle, needs to refuel in a short period of time, is not well suited to batteries. And so that's driving the 2, 3, 4, 5 year horizon for the bus industry, the truck industry, to say we have to do something.
I think if you look at the next 5 years, a lot of investors out there will be knowing where they can get more bang for their buck, or where there is a long-term potential. You've alluded to public transportation fleets. You've spoken about, we can talk about haulage. We're always talking about private fleets, taxi companies. It just goes on. The list is endless. Toyota wants to build a hydrogen city. Sony wants to build an electric car. So, you've made some observations in your report. You've touched on the landscape, but from where you sit as an expert, how do you see the next sort of 4 to 5 years panning out?
So I think what we'll see is 2 or 3 things. There will be a lot of activity, public activity this year, which is about the big picture and the vision. So there are organisations such as the Hydrogen Council, very powerful collection of very large companies saying we need to work together to deliver hydrogen, and we see an industrial benefit to that, and we can keep our businesses going, and we will be investing. But they will also need the supply chain, and some of the things that we see are opportunities to invest in resources. So the South Africans are very interested in getting better value for their platinum, developing indigenous industry. They need investment to do that. There are companies who produce very specialized materials throughout that supply chain. They might be in the chemicals industry, they might be in catalysis, they might be in areas which currently are not front and center in energy perhaps, but will be, and they will be looking for ways to diversify or to specialize or to acquire. And I think we'll see a lot of those moves starting to happen in the next year.
And finally, one of your conclusions of your reports is that of course, there are a lot of startups in this fair, and you've also noticed that you're likely to see more M&A activity in this fair. So in terms of, again, carrying on with the investment theme, what kind of consolidation are you looking at in the industry, and of course, what kind of impetus could that provide?
So I think there will be, we have 2 types of fuel cell companies, and we'll start with those. One is the pure play. They've started up. They've sometimes been around for a long period of time, a bit like the Hydrogenics acquisition by Cummins last year. And they now need the balance sheet, the channels to market, the after-sales support that is difficult to provide even at the scale they are now. So I think there's a strong likelihood that there will be more activity from the large companies into that, whether it's acquisition or whether it's taking a stake, whether it's partnerships. I think there will be changes also in the stationary power sector. So we've talked a lot about the automotive sector, but fuel cells and hydrogen also provide a change really in the way that the energy industry more broadly works. So the opportunities for hydrogen in energy storage, the opportunities for stationary heat and power, for data centers. I see a lot of interest from the likes of Google and Microsoft and those sort of companies in how they can decarbonize. And you could see, they have also started making moves towards the fuel cell and hydrogen space, towards the community. I think that there is a very broad spectrum of investment opportunities. I think there's a very broad definition of what it is that it takes to make the industry move forward. And so it's going to be a very formative year, in my view, as we start to see people taking positions, and that will have a knock-on effect through others.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. That was Professor David Hart, Director of E4Tech. For more details on ReachX podcasts, go to reachx.co.